The third reading of the Motor Vehicle Sales Amendment Bill is resumed. Chris Hipkins was speaking, I understand, and has 7 minutes remaining to speak if he wishes to take that time.
I do indeed. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when we finished before lunchtime, I was congratulating Heather Roy on the very comprehensive speech that she did to the third reading of this bill and contrasting it with the speech delivered by the Minister in charge of the bill, who seemed to have barely a grasp on what it was that the House was actually debating. He stuck entirely to the scripted notes provided to him by his department. I wondered, in fact, whether Heather Roy had, in fact, written the speech herself before she was given the chop from the job, and, in fact, John Boscawen was simply coming along to the House and delivering Heather Roy's speech, because he didn't seem to have any grasp on the bill that's being debated, the Motor Vehicle Sales Amendment Bill. He only took one call at the very beginning of the committee stage of the bill, and that was the only contribution from the government during the committee stage was a very short call from John Boscawen at the beginning, and nothing. I don't know what he said. It wasn't all that impressive. Didn't really say much. No mention of the ETS, which was quite a milestone for him. I think the only speech he's ever delivered in the House that didn't mention the ETS, but didn't demonstrate any knowledge of the bill that he is in fact in charge of, demonstrated no idea really about what he was going to do in the consumer affairs portfolio, which makes one wonder why in fact he is the Minister. What was wrong with the last one? She seems to be doing an okay kind of a job. Mr. Speaker, the committee stage of this debate on the Motor Vehicle Sales Amendment Bill did throw up some interesting little pieces of knowledge. Moana Meki shared with us how she chooses her cars, which car to purchase, by the number of cup holders that it has. So it has to be a white car, a silver car, and it has to have a cup holder. We also found out that Moana Meki made the mistake of choosing a car that didn't have a petrol light, and she discovered the hard way what not having a petrol light meant. And Moana confided in me at lunchtime that she continued to drive the car with no petrol, discovered that it didn't have a petrol light when it stopped. So Moana Meki, the scientist, thought that providing the petrol light wasn't on, the car must have still had petrol. Even though the needle was on empty, if there was no light blinking at her, the car must have still had petrol. It just goes to show, Mr. Speaker, that even scientists can get it wrong. Even scientists can get it wrong. Which is why, Mr. Speaker, it is so important that good quality consumer information is available to those purchasing second-hand motor vehicles. And that's one of the reasons why the consumer information notices provided in the second-hand motor cars when they're being sold are really important. One of the things this bill does do, however, is remove the obligation to put those notices in the case where the car is being sold privately. However, as I pointed out during the committee stage of the debate, a number of cheap cars are sold privately. I'd say the majority of cheap cars are sold privately, and therefore for young people this is quite a significant issue, because most young people will be buying cheap cars. They won't be going to a car yard and spending $5,000 or more. They'll be spending $500 picking something up off Trade Me or off the sale and exchange classified advertisements in the newspaper. So they're going to need to be very wary of what they purchase. If there's one message that we need to get through to those who are buying cars privately, it's buyer beware, because there won't necessarily be given information on whether the person that they are purchasing the car off still owes somebody else money on that car. And if the person that they're purchasing it off still owes somebody else money, the person who is buying it could well find themselves facing a liability they weren't aware of. So people who are buying cars privately need to be very cautious. It definitely is a case of buyer beware here. If they're purchasing a car from a licensed motor vehicle dealer, that licensed motor vehicle dealer does need to provide a notice on the customer consumer information notice whether or not somebody else still owes money on that vehicle, and that's a very positive thing. Mr. Speaker, we are here debating this legislation under urgency again. We had the first reading under urgency about a year and a bit ago. It was that urgent when we had the first reading of it that the House needed to go into urgency. It took over a year to suddenly become urgent again. And now we're back under urgency debating the committee stages in the third reading of this bill, wasn't really urgent in the first place. It's still not really urgent now. It's just simply poor organisation on the part of the government, who are absolutely abusing parliamentary process, in my view, in the way they are handling this bill, as they have with so many others. Mr Speaker, it says something, however, about the government's sense of priorities, that in this time when they have absolutely no economic plan whatsoever that they can tell New Zealanders about, they think the single most important priority at this particular point in time that the House should be giving its attention to is a bill to reduce the compliance cost for used car salesmen. That's the National Party's economic plan as at this point in time. It's to reduce the compliance cost for used car salesmen. They haven't got anything more important or more urgent to bring before Parliament, despite the fact that we were here until midnight last night. Still no economic plan from the government, still nothing that's going to close the wage gap with Australia, still nothing that's going to put hard-working Kiwis back into jobs. Instead, when we've got thousands of people lining up outside supermarkets applying for relatively low-wage jobs, the government thinks the most important thing that it can do for the New Zealand people at the moment is to reduce the compliance cost for used car salesmen. Mr Speaker, I think that says something about the government's priorities. Finally, on the consumer information notices, I would have to say, Mr Speaker, I hope the consumer information notices have a little bit more credibility and integrity than the consumer information notice or the voter information notice the National Party distributed before the last election, otherwise known as their pledge card. Because what we know already is that the voters couldn't believe a word on it, because they've already broken at least nearly half the promises on their pledge card. So if that was a consumer information notice, there would be a case to take before the fair trading case to take on the basis that they've broken their promises and that notice meant nothing. So with those comments, Mr Speaker, I will conclude. Thank you very much, Mr Speaker.
Claire Curran.